Okay, we come to the 12th distinguishing sign. This is the longest sign in the book. It's the longest section of the book, and there's a lot of repeating previous themes that come up, and he's kind of reaching a culmination here for the whole argument. And what he encourages people to think is that you living a Christian life is some of the best evidence that you are truly a Christian. He says, and by that he means not just living the Christian life like going through the motions of practicing religion, but specifically he means a holy life, a life that's putting away sin and practicing righteousness. And he points to 1 John 3:3. The context there is that one day we will see him, that is, see Jesus as he is. And then he says everybody who has this hope in him purifies himself. And so the expectation for a Christian is that they purify themselves. They try to live a holy life. And this is out of an overflow of a love for God. There's a love for God that is there. And if you love God and you see his glory and you see how great he is, then you will live in a way that honors him. Now, he does recognize that there is such a thing as a degree of backsliding. That is the idea that somebody might not quite live up to expectations and might not live the way that even they hoped that they would live. And yet he wants to say, yeah, that may be possible, but that probably should only go to a certain extent. It may explain your imperfection, but it won't become the rule of your life where you just begin to live like an unbeliever. We don't expect for believers to have their lives over the long term and in all areas of life looking like the life of an unbeliever. It may hit spots, it may hit smaller periods of time, and it may hit certain areas of life that you struggle with this sin. But he says we should still expect universal obedience, just a general tendency to want to walk in God's ways, and then a good deal of the practice of that. And so one of the other things that Edwards is getting at here then is that Jesus says in Matthew 7, he says, you will know them by their fruits. So the expectation then is, and he's happy to say this, the way that you're going to know if you're a Christian and the way that you're going to know if somebody else is a Christian is to look at their life. Does their life look like a Christian life? And if it looks like a Christian life, then we can tell by the fruit of the way that they're living that they really are a Christian. And if what's coming out of their life, what's being produced, looks like unbelief, then that may be a good indicator of unbelief. And so he's not trying to say anybody's saved by works. He's saying, okay, look, the way a person's saved is that Jesus saves them. They're saved by grace through faith alone. And yet when they're saved, the Spirit of God changes them. They get a new heart. They have new affections. Of course, this book is religious affections. They want to honor God because they see how great he is. They want to love him. They want to serve him. And out of this new heart and out of the Spirit of God living within them, they actually live differently. They live like a believer. They pursue righteousness. They put off sin. One telling mark he speaks about in this section is, even as he knows we won't be perfect, he says, well, what do you do when you sin? And that's pretty telling. If when you sin, you simply say, well, you know, Jesus saves, so I don't worry about my sin, then that indifference and that cold heart toward your own sin should be troubling to you. We shouldn't expect a Christian to react to their own sin in this way. We should expect a Christian rather to mourn over their sin and recognize that this sort of practice brings the wrath of God, and they want nothing to do with this. They should turn from their sin, repent of their sin, trust in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins, and then seek by God's help to walk in obedience. And if that's the way you respond to sin, then yes, you will sin because you're still not perfectly glorified, and yet you're responding to sin like a Christian. We expect a Christian should respond to sin. So these are the ways that Edwards is getting people to think about evaluating their own Christian life. To close the book then, Edwards basically says, look, I want you to believe, and I believe I'm correct to say, that the way you live your life, your own Christian practice really is a good indicator of saving faith. And he said, one of his last bits of examples is basically saying, you know, the book of Revelation, chapter 20, it says something about the basis on which we will be judged. And it says that we'll be judged on the basis of our works. And of course, the Bible speaks of this in other places. But the idea then is not, again, that our works save us, But yes, Jesus saves us, not our works. And yet we will be able to see and we'll be able to tell by the way you live your life whether or not you really have saving faith, whether or not you really have had God come in and make you into a new creature and you're really born again. And we do well to look at this as well. And for people to ignore that and to say, well, I have Jesus saving me, so it doesn't matter how I live my life. He says that's foolish. And it doesn't match the way that Jesus again says he will be judging us on the last day. So we do well to look at our own Christian practice and recognize that out of an overflow of the changed heart that we expect within, there will be the evidence of a changed life outside, a holy life outside. This is one of those marks that we do well not to ignore, but to pay careful attention to when we look to see and to evaluate our own souls, whether or not we are truly born again.